Imagine a queen so powerful that even her decay became fashion, and yet so fragile that she erased herself beneath a mask of powder and perfume. The hall glimmers as though it were a dream. Gold leaf flickers in candlelight. Pearls gleam like stars scattered across the velvet night, and the hush of expectation settles over every breath. All eyes tilt toward the throne. There she sits. A figure not quite woman, not quite statue. White as porcelain, still as a painted saint, bright as a star too distant to touch. She does not need to move. The room itself bends around her stillness. Fans pause. Steps soften. Words shrink to whispers. The air belongs to her. Her face is an icon. The Virgin Queen. Flawless, ageless, untouchable. Every portrait of her seems to have stepped down from the wall and taken flesh. But listen carefully. Beyond the silence, you will hear the sounds the courtiers pretend not to notice. The faint rustle of heavy gowns shifting against tired bones. The muffled sigh of wigs pinned too tightly against a tender scalp. The whisper of jewels chiming when her head tilts just so. These are not accidents. They are choices. Elizabeth does not merely rule with her crown. She rules with her performance. Yet what the court sees is only half the play. Step away from the throne room, past the tapestries and golden arches, into the inner chambers where candlelight burns lower. There, the ritual changes its audience. Maids lift linen shifts with practiced hands. Rosewater and vinegar stain the air, sweet at first, but edged with something sharper, metallic, like the scent of fear. Their dabbing is careful, almost reverent, as though they are not touching flesh at all, but tending a relic. One maid hesitates. Skin beneath the mask looks raw, angry, scarred. The queen's breath stills, the hesitation passes, and the ritual continues. This is not simple vanity. It is survival. For Elizabeth, her body is no longer hers. It belongs to England. It is crown. It is symbol. It is power incarnate. To let it falter is to risk everything. Even the throne room itself conspires in the illusion. Notice how the light is arranged. Never daylight, always candle. Daylight is merciless. It reveals blemishes, shadows, mortality. But candlelight flatters. It creates halos, deepens mystery, and hides flaws beneath flickering shadow. Portrait painters know this too. They do not paint the woman before them. They are ordered to copy from face patterns, a younger, eternal template. Whether she is 40 or 60, her portraits will always show her at 30, radiant, divine, immortal. This is the mask of Elizabeth, a mask that begins with paint and perfume but becomes something far greater, a myth made flesh. To remove it would be to reveal not a queen but a mortal woman. And mortal women are vulnerable. They bleed, they fail, they fall as her mother once fell. So the mask must never slip. Every glove perfumed, every shift changed, every candle arranged. Each is a brick in the fortress of her control. But behind every fortress is a shadow. Beneath the smooth surface lies redness. Beneath the perfume lies sweat. Beneath the crown lies a child who once saw her mother die for weakness. This is not a story of hygiene. It is not a tale of vanity. It is a study in control, of how power is built on illusion, and how illusion becomes prison. So let us walk together, past the perfumed halls and painted portraits, into the shadows where the mask begins to crack. Every mask has an origin, and Elizabeth's mask, the powder, the perfume, the illusion of immortality, was not born in a mirror, but in blood. She entered the world in 1533 with great celebration, a princess, the long-awaited heir. But to her father, Henry VIII, she was born a disappointment, not a son, but a daughter. That single accident of birth shaped the course of her life. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, once triumphant and dazzling, quickly fell from grace. Whispers grew into accusations: adultery, treason, witchcraft. Elizabeth was not yet 3 years old when her mother's body was taken to the scaffold. On that morning in 1536, Anne was stripped of crown and dignity, forced to kneel before the blade. One stroke, and she was gone. We do not know if Elizabeth remembered the moment with her own eyes, but its shadow followed her for the rest of her life. She grew up in a court that never let her forget. She was the daughter of the disgraced queen, the child who carried both promise and peril in her blood. One day declared a princess, the next declared illegitimate. Her status shifted like sand beneath her feet. Imagine the nursery in those years. Silent, watchful. Servants careful not to speak too warmly, lest affection for the girl become dangerous. Elizabeth learned to read faces the way other children read fairy tales. A glance could mean safety. A frown could mean danger. In silence, she discovered her first weapon, observation. The court itself was no playground. It was a stage filled with daggers behind every smile. Her father's moods were unpredictable, his favor a storm that could change direction without warning. Elizabeth learned early that survival meant control. Control of words, control of gestures, control of her own body. She laughed rarely, and when she did, it was measured. She spoke with precision beyond her years. Every moment was rehearsal. And then came exile from the center of power. When Henry married Jane Seymour, Elizabeth was cast aside, her title stripped, her place uncertain. She lived at the mercy of others, a royal child without the protection of legitimacy. It was here that fear became her closest companion. She understood, long before she wore the crown, that to be vulnerable was to be disposable. Consider the scars left by such a childhood. To watch your mother erased, to feel the weight of illegitimacy, to grow in a court where a single misstep could cost your life. From these wounds came her obsession with appearances. Cleanliness, ritual, cosmetics. These were not vanities, but shields. If she could control how she was seen, perhaps she could not be undone. And so the child became a survivor. In prayer, she found armor. In silence, she found strength. In perfection, she found safety. By the time she reached adulthood, Elizabeth had already begun weaving the mask that would one day define her reign. Behind the Virgin Queen, behind Gloriana, behind the painted face, was always that child. A girl who had learned too soon that reality kills, but performance saves. From the wounds of childhood came a hunger, not only for survival, but for control. Yet control does not always wear the face of restraint. Sometimes it arrives in the shape of indulgence. For Elizabeth, that indulgence was sugar. In Tudor England, sugar was no common spice. It was treasure, rare, costly, imported across oceans in fragile crates. To most people, it was a taste they would never know. But for Elizabeth, sugar became a constant companion. On her banquet tables, it appeared in every form imaginable. Candied violets glistening like glass, marzipan molded into miniature castles, oranges soaked in syrup until their skins shone like jewels. Sweetness was not only pleasure, it was spectacle, and spectacle was power. To serve sugar at every meal was to proclaim England's wealth and reach, proof that the Queen could summon the riches of distant lands and command them to decorate her table. The message was clear. Her power was as sweet as it was unshakable. But sweetness carries poison. Her love of sugar seeped into her body. Her teeth, once strong, began to blacken and rot. In those days, dental care was primitive. Twigs chewed into brushes, rags rubbed with ashes, or powders made from crushed eggshells. Elizabeth's own remedy was cruelly ironic. She mixed herbs into pastes, laced with the very thing that destroyed her teeth: sugar. She polished ruin with its cause. The result was inevitable. By the 1590s, her smile had become a ruin of cracked stumps, blackened enamel, and aching gaps. Foreign ambassadors whispered about her breath, foul enough to repel those who stood too near. Some even struggled to understand her words, her speech slurred by decay, yet the Queen refused the cure. Physicians begged her to let them pull the rotting teeth. She would not yield. Elizabeth, so defined by control, could not bear the surrender of her own mouth to the hands of another. Her fear of pain was greater than her willingness to heal. One tale survives. To calm her dread, a courtier offered himself as an example. Before her eyes, he opened his jaw to the surgeon's tools. The crack of bone, the scream of agony, the spray of blood. It was a sacrifice of loyalty, a grotesque theater staged for her reassurance. And Elizabeth, watching, did not flinch. She simply closed her own mouth tighter, lips sealing like a fortress gate. Control mattered more than cure. But But the story grows stranger still. Her courtiers, unwilling to expose her weakness, turned it into fashion. If the queen had black teeth, then black teeth must mean beauty, wealth, refinement. Noble women smeared soot and charcoal on their own teeth to mimic her. Decay itself became elegance. What elsewhere was a sign of poverty, at court became a mark of privilege. This is the power of royalty, to bend reality until even ruin becomes desirable. A smile of rot transformed into a badge of majesty, yet behind the pageantry there was agony. Imagine her at a banquet, marzipan castles crumbling under her fingers, candied fruits shimmering in candlelight, the court roaring with laughter. She smiles through pain, the sweetness on her tongue sharp against the ache in her jaw. Each bite is both indulgence and torment, pleasure and punishment. Here lies the paradox of Elizabeth's reign. What destroyed her body also reinforced her image. Sugar fed her weakness and displayed her strength. Her smile may have collapsed, but her legend only grew. For in her court, even suffering could be gilded, so long as it was hers first. Sweetness had rotted her smile, but ritual preserved her aura. And nowhere was ritual more sacred, more carefully choreographed, than in the Queen's approach to bathing. To our modern minds, bathing is cleansing, a release of dirt, sweat, and fatigue. But to Elizabeth and her age, bathing was peril. Water itself was seen as dangerous, a carrier of disease, a thief of strength. Doctors warned that pores opened by warm water invited illness, even death. And for a queen whose very body was a symbol of the nation, such risks could not be tolerated. So Elizabeth crafted a different kind of ritual, one built not on water, but on fabric, scent, and illusion. Picture her private chamber, the curtains drawn, candles burning low, the world outside held at a distance. Attendants move with quiet precision, peeling away the linen shift closest to her skin. To them, this simple garment is more than clothing. It is a purifier, believed to draw sweat, dirt, and hidden poisons out of the flesh. By changing shifts several times a day, Elizabeth cleansed without water, her body renewed by cloth rather than soap. Then came the anointing. Cloth steeped in rosewater, vinegar, and herbal infusions dabbed carefully against her arms, her neck, her chest. Lavender for freshness, rosemary for strength, thyme for protection. Each touch was gentle, reverent, as if they were not tending a body of flesh, but a relic too sacred to bruise. The Queen stood still, receiving this slow performance of cleanliness, more like a holy ritual than hygiene. The scents thickened in the air, sweet and sharp, floral and bitter, layer upon layer until her chamber was more garden than room. And in this garden her body ceased to be mortal. It became myth. But why refuse the bath? Why not submit to water, if only for relief? Because to Elizabeth, to undress fully and lower herself into a tub was to surrender control. Nakedness was vulnerability. Water clinging to the skin was intimacy, exposure, risk. A queen could not be seen as human. To remain untouchable, she had to avoid touch itself. And bathing in practice was no small task. Palaces had no plumbing. To bathe meant dragging out great wooden tubs, heating dozens of buckets, summoning servants to carry, pour, and stir. A bath became a public ceremony, an event that demanded labor and left her body bare before others. Far easier, far safer, to maintain the illusion of purity without ever risking the truth. Instead of scrubbing, she perfumed. Instead of soaking, she shifted. Instead of washing, she curated. And so she built a world where fabric and fragrance did the work of water, and the court praised her as the very image of cleanliness. But this was not cleanliness. It was concealment. Her rituals did not remove dirt. They buried it beneath silk and roses. Her attendants did not cleanse her body. They preserved the mask that cloaked it. And perhaps that was the point. For Elizabeth, purity was never about the flesh. It was about the performance. To bathe without water was to proclaim, "I am not like you. I am not bound by the same mortal needs. My body is not a body. It is a crown." And so the ritual became creed. Every shift changed, every drop of rosewater dabbed, Every glove perfumed was another act of separation between queen and human, between myth and truth. Here lies the chilling paradox. Elizabeth was admired as the cleanest of rulers, yet soap and water never touched her skin. Her purity was an illusion, as carefully painted as her face. An illusion that her court accepted, believed, and worshipped. For in her world, appearance was not the mask of power. Appearance was power itself. If linen and perfume guarded her body, then paint and powder preserved her face. For Elizabeth, the face was not simply skin. It was the altar upon which her legend was built. Each morning began with ritual. Attendants prepared the strange, heavy mixture known as Venetian ceruse, a paste of white lead and vinegar. It spread across her cheeks and brow like plaster upon stone, concealing every blemish, every shadow. Beneath it, her skin burned, blistered, and scarred, but the mask erased such truths. Over the lips, a stroke of deep crimson made not from roses, but from mercury, a poison drawn into the body with every smile. To the courtiers, the transformation was miraculous. In candlelight, her face gleamed like porcelain, smooth and ageless. But what they saw was not her face. It was a mask, built layer upon layer until the woman beneath disappeared. For in Tudor England, pale skin was not mere fashion. It was a proclamation of power. White as marble meant wealth, purity, even divine favor. To be pale was to be untouchable. Elizabeth knew this better than anyone, and so she painted herself not to appear beautiful, but eternal. Yet the irony is cruel. The very paint that gave her agelessness also destroyed her. The lead ate into her skin, corroding it until sores blossomed beneath the surface. The mercury poisoned her body, warping her memory, darkening her moods, making her hands tremble. But surrender was unthinkable. Where the skin cracked, she laid on more paint. Where the sores spread, she masked them deeper. She painted not in spite of the poison, but because of it. Painters themselves were forced into the illusion. They were forbidden to capture the queen as she truly appeared. Instead, they copied from face patterns, an official template preserved from her youth. Every portrait of Elizabeth bore the same flawless face, no matter her true age. Decade after decade, the Virgin Queen appeared untouched by time. The world saw a goddess, not a mortal woman, and the queen ensured the illusion held in life as well as art. Daylight, with its cruel honesty, was banished. She surrounded herself with candlelight, whose shadows softened and disguised the cracks. To wash her face would have been to strip away the mask, to confront the fragile, aging woman beneath. She refused. Better to live in paint than to die in truth. Consider the psychology at work. Elizabeth did not simply wear makeup. She wore power. Her face was England's face, her mask England's mask. To reveal her humanity would have been to weaken the nation itself. She had no choice but to sacrifice the woman to preserve the queen. Whispers spread among attendants, her skin raw and scarred, her hair thinning, her features too delicate to endure a touch. But still the paint returned each morning, thicker, heavier, as if to bury not just the blemishes but the woman herself. And so, the mask ceased to be disguise. It became identity. Elizabeth Tudor vanished beneath Gloriana, the eternal Virgin Queen. The woman aged, suffered, and trembled. The mask endured. Here lies the paradox of her immortality. She conquered time, but the price was her body. She became a goddess in the eyes of history, but only by erasing herself. The face that survived in portraits, flawless and radiant, was never hers at all. It was the mask, and the mask has outlived her. The queen's face shone flawless beneath candlelight, but step away from the throne, down the corridors where the velvet ends, and the illusion collapses. For beneath the glittering surface of her palaces, another world seethed, one of filth. Elizabeth's residences dazzled visitors with golden ceilings, carved wood, silk tapestries, and music drifting like incense. To foreign eyes, they seemed like heaven on earth, yet heaven had its stench. For Tudor palaces had no plumbing. Behind the velvet curtains, waste collected like a hidden army. Even the queen's own toilet, the elegant close stool, was nothing more than a velvet cushioned chair with a pot beneath. And though it was emptied with discretion, the task was no humiliation. The man entrusted with it, the groom of the stool, was a noble of power and influence. To manage her most private needs was to hold her most private trust. There, in the strange logic of the Tudor court, filth and authority entwined. But for the hundreds who filled the palaces, the courtiers, the servants, the guards, the reality was far less refined. Chamber pots sloshed in shadowed hallways, emptied into cesspits beneath the floors, or flung into ditches outside palace walls. By night, gong farmers crept through the darkness, faces wrapped, shoulders bent beneath the weight of buckets filled with human waste. They moved silently, like shadows carrying the kingdom's secrets, their labor as foul as it was invisible. The smell was inescapable. It crawled through corridors, seeped beneath doors, clung to clothes. To fight it, herbs were burned: rosemary, lavender, juniper. Floors were covered with rushes sprinkled with flowers and oils. At first, the rushes smelled fresh, but left too long. They trapped rot, spilled wine, crumbs of food, and vermin beneath them. The palace became both perfumed and putrid at once, a hall of beauty standing on a foundation of decay. Elizabeth herself could not escape it. She may have masked her own body in rosewater and silk, but the air betrayed the truth. When the stench became unbearable, she did not endure it, she escaped it. The royal court was ordered to move, abandoning one palace for another. Behind them they left a trail of waste, their grand procession little more than an escape from their own corruption. And here lies the haunting paradox. Above, candlelight, velvet, perfume. Below, cesspits, vermin, disease. A queen painted like a goddess drifting through rooms perfumed with cloves, while only feet beneath her, men shoveled rivers of filth into the night. The courtiers pretended not to smell it. They bowed, they applauded, they praised her as Gloriana, immaculate and untouchable. But the truth was everywhere, in the air they breathed, in the floors they walked, in the very walls of the palace. The queen's world was not heaven on earth. It was theater. And in theater, rot is always hidden backstage. Perfume could mask filth. Powder could hide sores. But illusion, like a fortress, must grow taller and thicker the longer it stands. By the closing decades of her reign, Elizabeth was no longer merely wearing a mask. She was trapped inside it. Her face had become fragile as parchment. Attendants whispered that the thick layers of Venetian ceruse cracked if brushed too roughly, flaking like plaster from a crumbling wall. The mercury in her rouge left her hands trembling, her memory clouded, her moods unpredictable. And yet, each morning the mask was rebuilt, layer upon layer, denial upon denial, until no one, not even the queen herself, could see what lay beneath. Mirrors, once a luxury of power, became her enemies. One by one they disappeared from her private chambers, banished like traitors. Reflection itself was forbidden. If she did not look, then time could not touch her. Still, the illusion had to be protected. Servants were assigned the strangest duties. One woman's sole task was to powder the queen's shoulders in secret, so that no glimpse of scarred or aging skin could reach the eyes of the court. Her thinning hair, weakened by years of poison, was replaced with fiery auburn wigs, glowing with the youth she no longer possessed. Each wig was a crown of false flame, each strand another reminder that the woman was gone. The myth remained. But the mask was not only paint and hair. It was ritual. It was silence. It was denial so complete that it bordered on madness. Imagine the queen, walking through her chambers lit only by candlelight, every window shuttered, every mirror gone. A lady-in-waiting, by accident, glimpses her uncovered cheek in the reflection of polished metal, raw, blistered, mottled by the cruel handwriting of time. The girl freezes. Elizabeth notices. And then, with lips trembling under their painted red, the queen smiles. The reflection is removed. The silence becomes law. Elizabeth no longer trusted the world with her face. In truth, she no longer trusted herself. The woman who had once been flesh and blood daughter and child, had been swallowed by the performance. What remained was Gloriana, a construct of powder and fear, sustained by ritual and worship. This was not vanity. It was survival stretched to its breaking point. Elizabeth had learned as a child that to be seen as weak was to risk death, and so she chose illusion so completely that she ceased to exist without it. But survival, when carried too far, becomes imprisonment. The mask that once shielded her from danger became her cage. She lived in a world where even her attendants feared to look at her too long, where candlelight replaced daylight, where silence replaced truth. And yet her court applauded the performance. They bowed to the mask, not the woman. They admired the illusion, never questioning what it hid. For by then, Elizabeth had succeeded too well. The mask was not disguise anymore. It was her identity. This was her descent, not into weakness, but into illusion. And in that descent, she discovered the cruelest paradox of power. The more you protect it, the less of yourself remains. By the end of her reign, Elizabeth's world had shrunk into ritual objects. Each item she carried, each gesture she performed, was part of the grand theater that kept her immortal in the eyes of others. Among these objects, one stands out, her perfumed walking stick. Picture the scene. The queen enters a chamber, her body wrapped in velvet heavy as armor, her wig a crown of false fire, her face frozen in alabaster paint. In her hand gleams a slender staff of polished wood, tipped with delicate silver. To the courtiers, it is elegant, a symbol of refinement, another jewel in the performance of majesty. But in truth, it is something more. Within the hollow top of the staff lies a secret. Herbs, spices, resins and oils. Cloves, roses, ambergris, musk. A portable garden of fragrance, a sanctuary she could summon at will. The moment an odor, sweat, rot, breath sour from wine, crept too close, Elizabeth raised the staff to her face. She inhaled deeply, drawing the controlled world of scent into her lungs, shutting out the reality around her. To the court, the gesture was graceful, almost theatrical, but it was also a declaration. I am not like you. I do not share your decay. I breathe only purity. The walking stick was not merely a support for a weary body. It was a shield against humiliation, a scepter of denial. Yet the fragility beneath was unmistakable. The queen who had once commanded fleets, who had stared down the Spanish Armada, was now fighting quieter enemies. The odors of her own court, the weakness of her poisoned body, the betrayal of flesh. The stick was both weapon and confession, a weapon to maintain her distance, a confession that she could no longer endure without it. And still her courtiers did not see weakness. They saw refinement. They saw majesty. They bowed lower, spoke softer, admired her elegance. For decades they had been trained to worship the illusion, and they obeyed. There is poetry and tragedy in this final act. Elizabeth had once wrapped her body in perfumes, her face in lead, her palaces in velvet. Now all of that had been distilled into one object, one motion, the slow raising of a perfumed staff to her lips. The gesture was simple. The meaning was infinite. It was her last ritual of separation, the final line she drew between herself and the world, between queen and human, between legend and truth. And as she drifted through her final years, staff in hand, she became almost spectral, a figure scented against reality, walking not through the world, but above it. The perfumed walking stick was Elizabeth's last shield against the world, but when she finally laid it aside, when her body surrendered to time and poison in 1603, something remarkable occurred. The woman died, but the mask did not. Her death was quiet, human, ordinary. Her skin scarred, her teeth blackened, her hair thinned to wisps. Yet history did not record these details. Instead, it clung to her portraits. Those eternal face patterns her artists had been commanded to copy for decades. In them, she never aged, she never weakened, she never faltered. The Virgin Queen remained untouchable, her painted gaze staring out of time itself. Consider the irony. For years, she had banished mirrors, refusing to face the truth of her own reflection. And yet, in death, history became her mirror, and it reflected only what she demanded. Not Elizabeth Tudor, the mortal woman, but Gloriana, the goddess made flesh. Poets praised her as divine, as England's eternal mother. Playwrights celebrated her as if she had risen above human frailty. Even her enemies remembered the legend, not the body. The sores, the scars, the poisons, the fear. All of it was erased, buried beneath the glowing surface of her myth. This was her greatest triumph, to shape her own memory so completely that the truth could never catch her. She had mastered not only how she was seen in life, but how she would be remembered in death. And yet, there is something haunting in this victory. What remains of Elizabeth Tudor herself? The daughter who lost her mother to the axe. The woman who laughed, who ached, who trembled in private. The person beneath the powder has been lost, dissolved into silence. All that survives is the mask. A mask polished until it gleams across centuries, staring from museum walls, glowing in history books, whispered about in the myths of empire. The mask outlived her. The mask became her. It is tempting to call this victory. And in one sense, it is. Elizabeth turned her body into a nation's symbol, her image into immortality. But in doing so, she erased herself. And that is her legacy, to be remembered not as a woman, but as a mask. The legacy of the mask remains, but it leaves us with a question that hangs in the silence like the echo of a bell. What was the cost? Elizabeth Tudor was no longer just a monarch. She became an invention, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, eternal and untouchable. Yet to preserve that invention, she surrendered the simplest human freedom, to be seen as herself. Imagine her private chambers after her death, the shutters closed, mirrors long removed, the air still faintly scented with rose water and vinegar. A wig rests on its stand, auburn strands unchanging while the skull that once wore them decays. An open jar of powder clings to the rim with a ghostly dust. Perfumed gloves, stiff with age, lie folded on a table. Objects of performance, now mute relics. The stage is empty, but the props remain. This is the prison of power. To hold it, Elizabeth perfected illusion. To keep it, she erased the woman beneath. She conquered her enemies abroad, commanded her nobles at home, and shaped the destiny of a nation. Yet her final conquest was stranger still. She conquered herself, painting over her own existence until there was nothing left but the mask. And so history remembers her as she demanded, radiant, flawless, divine. The woman who cracked, trembled, suffered. She was buried beneath centuries of myth. What endures is the performance, not the performer. Perhaps this was her greatest triumph. Perhaps it was her greatest tragedy. Or perhaps it was both. For in the end, Elizabeth mastered the art of being seen without being known. That art made her immortal. But immortality, when purchased at such a price, is its own kind of death. Final reflection. Elizabeth's greatest triumph was not defeating the Armada, nor commanding her court. It was mastering the art of illusion, of being seen without being known. But in that triumph lies the warning. When power demands a mask, the mask does not simply protect, it consumes. And centuries later, we remember the legend. But the woman beneath is gone, her silence echoing louder than any crown.